We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I'm gonna die on the battlefield. I'm gonna die.
We were married almost, would have been almost 21 years, I believe, if they hadn't killed her.
I'm gonna die on the battlefield with glory in my soul.
Just a nice little lady, 5'2", 105 pounds, soaking wet.
First, they came for the communist, but I was not a communist, so I did not speak out. Then they came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, and so I did nothing. When they came for me, there was no one left. Martin Niemöller, Lutheran pastor, 1939, Nazi Germany.
As your first president, I warned you that government was not reason. It is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. History now is full circle. You must speak out, or like grass before the sigh, your generation stands witness to the death of a nation. Our revolution now becomes your revolution.
You know, people would never believe me if I told them that world government is not coming, it's here.
I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on it was Death, and hell followed with him. Revelation 6:8.
The nation has been hijacked by international forces. The dark side, bent on global governance. Alex Jones, Infowars.com.
Behold a pale horse ride. They claim to seek a new world order, nations without borders, but don't believe the lie.
America's under judgment. The Republic is in distress. Listen to her cry. I am not a Democrat and I am not a Republican. I'm affiliated with no party. I'm a conservative and I'm a Christian. What we're witnessing is spiritual warfare.
When I was a boy, things were pretty much like those wonderful Norman Rockwell images of 30s America. The first things I remember are frosty Carolina mornings with a cheery fire crackling in my mama's big black wood cook stove. I remember snowflakes as big as goose feathers and a moon the color of new-made country butter and a night sky like diamonds against black velvet reaching from horizon to horizon. I remember Sunday school and kneeling at the cross and trying to imagine what God looked like. I remember sitting with my granddaddy on the front porch and watching the last of that magnificent southern sun bleed away into the twilight sky. I remember awesome steam-puffing 10-wheel locomotives, and the conductor's watch looked as big as one of my grandmother's biscuits. I remember my mother smiling in a red and white checkered dress, and Christmas always seemed so far away. Yes, I remember you, Carolina, grand old lady of the South. I remember you as home. But today, something's wrong, and we all know it. I'm Charlie Daniels, and I'm here to tell you about it.
It's been my great privilege to serve this nation in the uniform of the U.S. Army. Most of my time in the Army I spent in special operations. I was one of the original members of the Army's Delta Force. I commanded all the Army's Green Berets. I served a tour at the Central Intelligence Agency and finished my career as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. I was the commander of the Delta Force in the events that we now know as Black Hawk Down. I'm Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, U.S. Army retired. One of my jobs when I was in the Army was I ran the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School at Fort Bragg. That's the school that trains all the Army Special Forces. And one of the things that we taught there was insurgency and counterinsurgency, and much of the insurgency was focused on Marxist insurgencies.
My name is Elena Kita. I was born in the country of Romania, a country that became communist.
I see things in America today that just greatly disturb me.
They intend to use the civil unrest as a pretext to take control of society.
Let me tell you what the things are that I see that are consistent with the pattern that has been seen historically around the world as societies move to Marxism.
In Romania, the changes took place fast and brutal.
They nationalized major sectors of the economy.
To get that control, they want to engineer a total economic collapse.
Goldman Sachs. Remember we bailed out AIG and gave the Goldman Sachs gang $13 billion of our dough to cover their bad bet? When you lose, you lose.
Now in America, that's exactly what we did with the bailouts. We nationalized major sectors of our economy, auto industry, banking.
The whole nation has changed. The whole game is over. This is not capitalism. Call it what it is, it's fascism.
In the morning, there was the new management. The old management was out.
Capitalism, you rise and fall on your own merits.
He was lucky to be in a nice prison cell.
You're not too big to fail. Oh, but if they failed, we all would have died, they told us. They failed. You know what would happen if they failed? They wouldn't get their $45 billion worth of bonuses. That's what would have happened. Nothing would have happened.
Globalists are conquering our nation through financial fraud.
In capitalism, the slack would have been picked up by those who were doing smart business.
We are facing an organized banking criminal cartel of internationalists who are hell-bent on destroying national sovereignty, and chief among that, the United States of America.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
They want to engineer a civil war in this nation by forcing the people through desperation to fight back.
We don't put in to the defense of what they left us 1/10 of the effort that they put in to give it to us.
They have engineered the financial collapse so they can pose as the savior and point at the civil unrest as a reason to bring in tyranny and martial law to restore order.
The second thing that they do is they redistribute wealth.
In Romania, a doctor was not paid much more than the checkout clerk at the supermarket.
What we know today as Obamacare was a redistribution of wealth.
When my mother had her heart attack, she was taken to a mental hospital.
We've heard a lot about the redistribution of wealth in America.
She died. In a room full of 20 other people. And at my cries, everybody told me, suppress it and leave.
The third thing that you see is a discrediting of the opposition.
My father was arrested in 1958.
Because the authorities in power have to discredit those people that would stand up and say, I don't support
The
this.
sentence was 10 years
I'm not going to allow this to happen in my country.
and confiscation of all estate. Tortures of the prisoners cannot even be compared with Middle Ages.
As we lose our freedoms, as the Bill of Rights and Constitution goes out the window, we're losing the very oxygen that creates our prosperity.
The woman he loved for all those years was gone. The reason for his leaving was gone. He was never the same.
Horror bears many labels.
Think of that repeated millions of times.
Communism, fascism, socialism.
There was no hope. There was darkness.
New world order.
People did not talk. People did not smile.
None different.
Everything was rationed.
The Department of Homeland Security issued a declaration to all law enforcement, state, local, and federal, saying that the future threats to America were right-wing Christian groups, Second Amendment groups, pro-life groups, and returning veterans.
Wake up, America,
I fall into all four categories.
while you still have time.
The young men and women that are serving our nation today, that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and other places in the world, and they are declared to be future threats to America.
Slumber is over.
Well, what was that all about? Well, in my view, fitting the model, it was about suppressing the opposition.
Do you understand what NDAA means? NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act, passed by Congress and signed by President Obama, allows the military to arrest, secretly detain, and even kill American citizens.
Your children and grandchildren will cry at your graves if you do nothing.
This is 180 degrees the opposite of what our forebears established when they founded our great republic.
Do something.
The NDAA is a death warrant against America and due process. It is the very essence of tyranny.
They say that I'm the father of a nation. Holy Scripture tells us that if a father will train up a child in the way that he should go, that when he is old, he will not depart from it.
You do have to have a spiritual life if you want to keep your family and society together.
Legislation that was passed that we now know as hate crimes legislation was designed to make it more difficult for pastors to stand up and talk about moral and social issues in America.
I'm very familiar with that.
Sons and daughters, have you departed from the way that you should go?
There have been a great number of historical distortions about our founders and their faith. But there's also a story that most have never heard. It's the story about the pastors of the Revolution.
Pastors of the church in this nation in the 1700s literally were the fire behind the Revolution.
When people hear the title Black Robed Regiment, they wonder, what in the world is that?
They taught their people that there was only one king, and his name was not George, or not the civil state at all, but Jesus.
Well, that's actually the title that the British gave the preachers of the Revolutionary War period. For example, John Muhlenberg was a Lutheran pastor in Woodstock, Virginia. For months before the war broke out, he had been preaching about the principles of liberty and just government and the need for Christians to take a stand. He was actually there the day that Patrick Henry gave his great speech.
Give me liberty, or give me death.
His last sermon as pastor of that church would be January the 21st, 1776.
America should be called
And he read from Ecclesiastes chapter 3.
a time to be born and a time to die.
A time of war and a time of peace.
Commissioned by General
He began to remove his clerical robe. He revealed a colonial soldier's uniform, and he challenged the men of his church to join him in the 8th Virginia Regiment to fight for liberty. The men joined their pastor, now Colonel Muhlenberg. I'm Dan Fisher, the pastor of Trinity Baptist Church in Yukon, Oklahoma, and I'm one of the leaders of the modern-day Black Robed Regiment. The pulpits were aflame with righteous indignation against the tyranny of the British Crown. Today, the church is silent. The British understood that these pastors were the great threat.
We have lost sight of our spiritual heritage.
Just think of this country again as one nation under God. America with borders, a nation of patriots who are proud of our heritage, our achievement.
That spiritual foundation is found in our Declaration of Independence. In the second sentence, declares, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
For centuries, humanity reeled under the boot of oppression, the chains of servitude. But for this republic,
it is the single most radical statement in Western political thought in at least 2,000 years.
Next thing that you'll see in the Marxist model is you will see an effort to
We
censor.
no longer have freedom of religion.
You have to censor pastors.
There is freedom from religion.
Pastors have a ready audience.
God has disappeared.
Pastors have an opportunity to stand up and speak against these kinds of things.
From Easter, from Christmas, there are winter holidays, and spring holidays.
To talk about the evils of Marxism, socialism.
Where did this 501c3 controversy come from?
In 1954, a U.S. senator from Texas named Lyndon Baines Johnson was running for re-election.
Some conservative groups were making a pretty valid case that he was involved in communism.
He almost lost the election because of the church.
He was able to slip into the tax code a restriction
that made Mr. Johnson very angry.
That any nonprofit organization, including churches, could not speak in favor of or against a candidate.
The people that wrote these knew that if the civil authority ever got their hand into the church, their authority into the church would lose its sovereignty.
I believe that law is unconstitutional.
IRS page, publication 557, page 17.
Saying that churches cannot speak in favor of or against candidates does not mean that pastors cannot speak out.
Propaganda is normally defined as spreading of doctrine. The doctrine of Christ is one example of doctrine.
Where we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
Where did this idea of separation of church and state come from?
From then President Thomas Jefferson, in a private personal letter written to a group of Baptists, simply telling them,
you certainly won't find it in the Bible.
There was a wall of separation.
Pastors today believe that somehow it's written into the Constitution.
Keeping the federal government from interfering.
I challenge you to look at the First Amendment.
With the affairs of the church.
You won't find the words separation, church, or state.
Many secularists in our country began to redefine the separation of church and state to mean that it was something other than what Jefferson actually said.
So this concept of the separation of church and state is actually a lie.
And I think we've lost sight of that.
This nation was and is a Christian nation, Mr. Obama.
The only hope for America is for the church to repent.
We're getting off the couch. We're going to turn the TV off. We're listening now.
To the point that they will not compromise, that they will speak the truth, no matter what the cost. Let the civil authority do what they may. The church must stand for truth, or America is finished.
The next thing that you'll see in the Marxist model is you will see an effort to control gun ownership.
By decree, people were forced to turn in their weapons.
Because you can't have a population that is armed.
You got to beware of subversive treaties with the United Nations which bypass our Second Amendment and are being snuck through in the dark of night.
If you put the frog in the pot and the water's cold and you slowly turn it up, he will sit there and boil. But if you throw him in a boiling pot, he will jump out. And that's what's happening.
We, the people, have the right to keep and bear arms so that no king or emperor or slave driver ever rises up again and stops this sacred, unique, unprecedented experiment in self-government.
Our president and our Secretary of State have both said that our president, our administration, will sign the United Nations Small Arms Declaration.
From your favorite uncle guitar player. Freedom is not free.
It must cause concern among Americans who believe in the Second Amendment right.
Our life is a gift from God, and we not only have the right to defend it, by all considerations, we have a moral, intellectual, even spiritual responsibility.
It ain't about hunting.
To defend our sacred gift of life.
England, Germany, France, Australia, Canada.
From evildoers.
Almost the rest of the world are all disarmed.
The government, at least a small portion of it, is with me right here today on this firing line. The people.
We're the only people left with the constitutional right as free men to keep and bear arms.
Those who support this legislation or support this whole concept of a UN Small Arms Declaration will tell you that it is designed primarily to focus on military weapons.
I'm Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America.
Well, the question we have to ask ourselves as Americans, do you trust that?
There's a bunch of socialists that are at war with the freedoms of America and with the property of America, the children of America. They want it all. And of course they want our guns. And we react accordingly. Namely, you can't work within the system. And even our friends at the NRA are often working with that view in mind, and we find that you just can't make peace with people who are declaring and conducting total war against you.
We're accused all the time of being the reason that the Mexican gangs and the cartels have weapons, when in fact that's not true. But does anybody really trust a United Nations international body to determine how we as Americans, under the Second Amendment, buy, sell, and control our arms. Well, I don't.
We don't want them just to roll back what Obama's done, but we want them to get behind measures that, for instance, Representative Paul Brown of Georgia is likely to introduce a repeal of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. That's the kind of thing that's needed. We need to roll back the bad things that we've gotten used to.
And then the final thing that you see in these Marxist movements is you see the leadership establishes a constabulary force.
Boom! I got shot through the shoulder. My first thought was, damn, that hurts. Bloody mist, smelled like fresh ground hamburger.
A force that is designed to control the population.
I had 4 children, Sarah, Sam, Rachel, and Elishaba.
His family was surrounded by the federal police.
Kids in town get basketballs and bicycles and grow up with that kind of stuff, and kids out there in the North Idaho in the woods, the country boys, they get rifles and dogs, you know.
I was invited by Colonel Bo Greitz, who he and I were friends, to go up there and handle the negotiations for the FBI.
My wife taught the kids mostly at home, the book learning.
This is what we found.
Classical tyranny.
They sent in 500 militarized police officers
to fight foggy enemies. Now the military-industrial complex is militarizing police, buying armored vehicles, and basically turning our own country into a war zone.
I thought it was either a mountain lion or a bear, because those are the 2 things that'll really get a dog going, most any dog.
They hunt animals up there to eat, to feed their family.
Their job was to kill that dog that day with a silent submachine gun.
So Sammy Weaver took off with his adopted brother down the hill.
Heard a gunshot, heard the dog yelp.
Sammy got down there, and one of the U.S. Marshals shot the dog in the back.
Sam was just a little guy, but he had a lot of courage.
Sammy saw his pet dog that he had raised running around in circles till he died.
All this time I'm yelling and said, boys, get home, get home.
And then they shot his arm off.
It's an ambush.
Sammy turned around and said, Dad, I'm coming home. And the U.S. Marshals machine gunned him in the back. The little 11-year-old boy was running away.
Sunshine, exposure of corruption and evil is the greatest disinfectant.
I turned around and I looked and couldn't see anything or anyone.
Get involved.
It was still quiet.
Educate your friends and family.
Sarah behind me and Kevin fell in right behind her, and we're all 3, 1, 2, 3, right through the door.
She was holding her baby, nursing her baby, when she came to the door to open the door to let the children come in and her husband.
Warn people.
I just got in the door and turned to the right.
Speak out.
Boom!
FBI sniper shot her in the head.
Show them this film.
And he waited until the adopted son ran past Vicki Weaver.
And he drew him a picture of what he saw when he looked through the scope. And that was Vicki and holding the baby.
And he shot him in the lung.
Christian values, this land we all love, its heritage of hope, achievement, and preservation of the human spirit will perish unless we reclaim our destinies as the Founding Fathers dreamed it.
Psalms 94:16 says, rise up against the evildoers and stand up against the workers of iniquity.
After they'd shot Vicki and Kevin and we got our senses about us, I got the baby out from under Vicki and handed her to Rachel.
They wanted to go to heaven to be with their mom and brother, they told us, and they were crying. The little girls were crying.
I've always loved this country. I still do.
This is the kind of things happening in America today.
Our republic, our planet itself, hangs by a thread.
Randy Weaver and the girls gave up and came out of the building, and we took them by the hands and walked down the trail.
You are the solution.
I saw 500 militarized police with face paint and these woolly-bully outfits that made them all look like trees and bushes, lining the path that we had to walk by.
What happened to the Weaver family at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, can happen to you if they decide they don't like your politics or your religion.
The corruption and evil being carried out by the globalists in our name makes King George III of England in 1776 look like an angel in comparison.
Martial law. Kind of reminds you of Mount Dillon, don't it?
And it's about to get a lot worse.
Some people would argue that martial law is a good thing.
Well, America ain't seen this little totalitarian joy since Civil War Reconstruction.
I suggest to you that it means government. effective government has failed.
A time when the Federal Army ran roughshod over Southerners who had no rights and were subjected to a way of control more like the Nazis.
You will be made to present your papers, or proof of vaccination, or whatever it might be that the government has called for you to have and to be able to prove. The UN is seeking gun control at unprecedented levels.
We've had the Secretary of the Army and others come out recently and say in the Council on Foreign Relations publications they want thousands of troops per city. Posse Comitatus has basically been dismantled.
Posse Comitatus, translation, federal troops had to stay on the reservation, keep being used domestically against the American people.
Over 1 billion bullets bought, hollow points, illegal to use in foreign wars, by different agencies of the federal government via Homeland Security. We're seeing armored pillboxes being purchased. We're seeing TSA setting up highway checkpoints.
Will martial law then be instituted to regulate the people who have said enough is enough?
They're now issuing new uniforms for urban combat.
The ancient bane of republics has been to go from an usurping king or an usurping executive to fleeing to the military junta, to the generals to save you, back and forth between these two twin evils.
The reality we face is a darkened day and a long night in America.
The founders showed us the middle path, and the middle path is sovereign states standing up under the Constitution, pursuant to the Constitution, pursuant to the 10th Amendment. When it comes to the veterans, when's the last time you read the Constitution? Do you understand the reasons why they rebelled? They rebelled for many of the reasons that we see now happening today. Post 9/11, we had an assertion that the president, as commander-in-chief, could treat the American people exactly the same as though they were a foreign enemy in wartime.
$40+ billion has now been attached in the FAA budget over the next 5 years to fund the launch of 30,000 drones in the United States to surveil the American people.
Resistance to tyrants is service to God. I believe that was said by Mr. Jefferson. Those boys sure had a way with words. They were statesmen, not politicians.
There is a network of intelligence gathering established in the United States that is gathering information on citizens. Explaining fusion centers to people who have never heard of them before is not an easy thing to do. Now everybody's part of an information network in a growing surveillance society.
In London today, the average citizen is photographed 300 times per day.
Every text message and every communication on Facebook and Twitter paint a picture of all of your network of friends. This is examined by analysts in the fusion centers.
They built all this in the shadows.
They can use this system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made.
They incrementally tried to brainwash the military and police into accepting it.
And attack you on that basis to sort of derive suspicion from an innocent life and paint anyone in the context of a wrongdoer.
Now they're preparing to go operational with it.
Who are the potential insurgents? Apparently it's everyday citizens who have to be watched and monitored.
No one can meaningfully oppose them. If they want to get you, they'll get you in time.
The model of a fusion center was developed on the battlefield for military purposes.
They'll flip the switch, say that because of the dangers that we face in the world, you know, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority, we need more power.
The battlefield appears to be the United States.
That's the scary news here.
Military tactics, technology, and skills are actually being laid out with a network through the fusion centers.
There will be nothing the people can do at that point to oppose it, and it'll be turnkey tyranny.
These are not just plans or laws on the shelf.
The greatest fear that I have regarding the outcome for America of these disclosures is that nothing will change.
We all remember that Hitler had the brown shirts. And of course, in the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler killed a lot of those people because even Hitler became afraid of their power and their control over the population. Well, you say we don't have a constabulary force here.
Mr. Obama said that he needed a 1 million-man army.
Our current president said if I'm elected, I will have a national civilian security force that will be as large as and as well equipped as the U.S. military.
We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong.
Remember that? Well, guess what? He got it. I just remember a different country.
you need to read the health care legislation.
Now, what's that Army for?
There are provisions for the commissioning of officers to work directly for the president.
Answerable only to him.
In the time of national emergency.
You better keep up with the weather, folks.
What is a national emergency, and what exactly is the function and the purpose of those officers that would be commissioned to work directly for the president?
As a young girl, I lived for 7 years under Hitler's brutal regime. We had a tremendous depression. We had 1/3 of our workforce unemployed. Poverty was so bad that on an average day in my home, 30 people would knock on the door for a bowl of soup and a slice of bread. We had anarchy in our cities. There were two political factions fighting each other. The Communist Party was getting very powerful, so was the National Socialist Party. The word Nazi derived. How could you believe that a Christian nation, almost 100% Catholic, would elect a monster like Hitler? Hitler neither looked like a monster or acted like a monster. He talked like an American politician. Dictatorship didn't happen overnight. It took 5 years, gradually, little by little, with a lot of rules and regulation, to come to a full-blown dictatorship. We had gun registration. We also had national health care. We had actually good health care before Hitler. It was under private insurance. We had good doctors. We had good hospitals. This all stopped. Then he nationalized our radio stations. Newspapers were being censored if they wrote anything against him. Before Hitler, we had an excellent educational system in public school. We prayed before class and after class, and we also had religious education twice a week. This all stopped. Hitler nationalized education. The crucifix was gone, and there was Hitler's picture with the Nazi flag on each side, and the teacher said, "Today we don't pray anymore. We sing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles." We were being bused to a Hitler rally where he spoke. And he was a great orator. And because I was very small at age 12, I was seated in the front row. I literally made eye contact with Hitler. I was almost hypnotized and mesmerized. One morning, I looked out of my classroom window and I saw Vincent and all the other people who were mentally handicapped being ushered into a van. I was curious, so I asked my principal, "Are they taking them out for a picnic or something, for an outing?" He said, no. The letters came back to the parents that they were all euthanized, useless mouths to feed. I also found out after the war that they euthanized 20,000 handicapped children.
Did you know Homeland Security had hired a guy named Marcus Wolf? He's just the ex-head of the East German secret police.
On how to shut up the tyranny we now see today.
We also had a federal police force, commonly known as the Gestapo, secret police. People were being arrested and never seen again.
Now, why does America need that?
The exact same systems are being put in Australia, in Western Europe, in New Zealand, in Canada.
It makes your head pop, don't it?
The Gestapo knocked on your door and said that you purchased that pound of sugar. By law, you should have turned in the sugar coupon, but we are not going to arrest you. But you will have to come to our office and inform what your neighbor is thinking politically, your boss, your family, your friends. That way, they created a network of informers.
Snitches, it would intentionally be in small groups of people in your neighborhood.
Daddy'd roll over in his grave.
At the grocery store, wherever you were acting, and somebody would be reporting your activities.
Figure it out, folks. Seems to me we've been had.
Preparing the public to tattle on their neighbors.
If you see something, say something.
It's an attempt to induce a permanent state of fear and paranoia. Why, you ask? So you'll be frightened enough to hand over to the government willingly the few civil liberties you have left.
If you go to the airport, you can have the joy of experiencing a full-body scanner where the government, an agent of the government, can see you or your mother or your father or your youngster naked. Now, a government that would consider that okay to do is one that has moved into the realm of treating people as slaves or chattel or just an asset or a resource. You're no longer a human who has rights given to you by God, and that there are certain barriers they must not cross. Take the pat down when you go to the airport. You'll at least know, you can look them in the eye to see who's molesting you.
I see the history repeating. The history of terror.
That's why everybody should keep their guns and buy more guns and ammunition.
Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
I came here for freedom, escaping the tyranny. And here it's happening little by little again. Wake up, America.
Whether we recognize it or not as Americans, our society is moving towards Marxism.
America, I warned you.
When government, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power.
It is a fatal tendency to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation the will of a party.
It will render powerless the checks provided of one on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as those from which we separated.
A small but artful and enterprising minority, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, afterwards destroying the very engines that raised them to unjust dominion. Let it not be so.
It was a beautiful spring morning in 1944. I was 7 years old and soundly asleep in the early morning when my mother woke me and told me to get dressed. We were going to church. It was a weekday, but the Methodist Church in Valdosta, Georgia was packed to the rafters with people come to pray. It was June 6th, D-Day. And as we gathered, the cream of American youth were charging heavily fortified machine guns and artillery fire on the beaches of Normandy and being shredded to ribbons as they left their amphibious craft and ran onto the beach. It was a slaughter. The casualties were unthinkable, but still they came, wave after wave, taking the beach one bloody inch at a time. And at the end of the longest day, we had established a beachhead. If we'd lost this one, it was all over for Europe. Where did the people of America turn to for help on that day in 1944? They turned to God, and He answered like He's done so many times before. Are we going to sit on our hands and live our comfortable lives and dishonor the blood spilt at Normandy, Valley Forge, Gettysburg, Shiloh, the jungles of Vietnam, and the deserts in Iraq? Are we going to passively sit back and allow the future of our children to be put into the hands of inept, power-drunk, spin-crazy politicians? The answer is no, 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 not now, not ever. I'm not giving up without a fight, and I mean a fight to the finish. I'm not going to stand by and let these scumbags steal my country. But the sad truth is, if mankind tries to do this on our own, we will fail miserably. But we don't have to do it by ourselves. Listen.
America is in peril.
If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and will heal their land. 2 Chronicles 7:14. the Holy Bible.
What is the goal? It is to create a one world government. It's as old as time itself.
A globalist regime has begun the undertaking of a transformation of what is America. And we're going to feel more of this global dynamic that is changing the nature and scope of the American experience.
Agenda 21 is a global system of enslavement to cut off resources to make you beholden to the state. And the drones, the NSA's illegal warrantless wiretapping, all of this surveillance feeds into the control.
Kind of like the Trojan horse. You roll it inside the gates, all the bad guys slither out in the dark of night.
The only way this is going to be defeated is to understand the nature of what has enveloped our country.
This course has got to change if American sovereignty and mankind are going to survive.
Prince Charles got in financial leaders and very wealthy people from across the world.
The brotherhood of darkness.
We cannot be anything less than courageous and revolutionary in our approach to tackling climate change.
To actually lay out a program that would be the agenda for the 21st century.
For the architects of the New World Order, world government is only the beginning.
The cock has crowed, friends. Denial will not stand.
Once they have control, they plan on absolutely dehumanizing humanity.
It means you're going to have an international body monitoring your car mileage, your home energy use, your airline travel, your train travel. If the United Nations has their way, Americans will be forced to emit the same carbon emission volumes they did in 1867. If you exceed your carbon allowance, you are going to owe an international body not only an explanation, but probably money and a piece of your freedom.
It's all about a global carbon tax which goes directly to funding world government.
Our economic system is to change from free enterprise into a system of public-private partnerships.
Public refers to government, local, county, state.
What Benito Mussolini called corporatism.
Federal, the United Nations.
And what the world came to know as fascism.
Private refers to
multinational corporations working with governments.
A masterful, sophisticated, and diabolical way of transferring wealth.
Stand witness to this long-planned agenda for recreating our beloved republic and the world into a tyrannical new world order.
There are half the number of ranchers in America as there were just 20 years ago.
My family was pioneers that came into this country. They had traveled across the United States in a covered wagon and come down here along the Virgin River and settled in 1877. I'm Cliven D. Bundy. I am the last man standing in the livestock business in this area. You know, they're trying to run a rancher off the land, but is it the rancher? Is it his cows? What we're created here is the bureaucrats, the bureaucracy with army against we the people. They're gaining territory. Territory seems to be what it is. Is this Agenda 21 or what is it? If American people don't wake up and pay attention to the Constitution of the United States, which is a perfect blueprint for what we should be doing and solving all of our problems, if we don't wake up and pay attention to that document, we will not have no freedom left. And in order for us to get those freedoms, we're going to have to fight a civil war. Here in America, last week, here on my ranch, was a good example of American people against American people. We don't want that to happen. The citizens moved and moved and moved towards these guns with the bullhorns saying, warn them, if you come any further, we'll fire on you. And they walked right over the top of them, and they drove those bureaucratic army out of the county into Arizona and cross Arizona into Utah. And that shows what America can do with the faith and with the spirit of our Heavenly Father. And here is the solution. We can solve this right now. Every county sheriff across the United States of America needs to disarm the United States bureaucracy.
In the Old West, the sheriff was all powerful.
Morning, boy. Their time is history, but the legacy lives on. Today's sheriff is no different. Your sheriff is the highest elected law enforcement officer in the land.
They need to act like Boy Scouts and serve and help and be polite and help the little old lady across the street, not throw her down in the gravel.
And it would behoove all Americans to pay strict attention that they've got a constitutional sheriff who will protect and defend those founding documents.
Maybe I'm not the last man standing, Maybe America is waking up, and maybe they do know what good beef tastes like.
Agenda 21 is sucking up American territory like a water spout.
Through the effects of the Agenda 21 policies at the federal level and now at every state level, and in fact, now infused into every county in America.
Much of it's already taking place in a town near you.
Agenda 21 is designed to control every activity of every human being on planet Earth.
How would you like to come home and find your child spying on you, trying to find where your guns are, and give them to the school officials? Ask you, what religion are you? Because our school needs to know. God is not allowed in American schools anymore. However, they do allow Islam and the Muslim faith. Common Core is Chapter 36 of the United Nations Agenda 21.
They don't want children to think for themselves. They want them to think collectively. They want them to think socialistically.
The plan for a one-world government. Everything your child says and does and his emotions are put into a database. It is not about education. It is about a political agenda. The federal government shares it with the United Nations, Homeland Security, and any other federal department. Parents no longer know what their children are being taught. Globalists are writing revisionist history.
All these freedoms that were outlined by our founding fathers, by the framers of our Constitution, that has to be wiped clean.
The dumbing down of America.
So that new values could be superimposed on a blank slate.
Our founding fathers have been depicted as terrorists.
There's no individual mentality. Nobody's an individual anymore. And the lone wolf, a loner, oh my goodness, we can't have any of that.
It turns your children into good little socialists.
We've got to throw a national hissy fit, and we have to do it now.
It is the imperative for all people who want our species to have any future to resist the globalists.
Ever read the Communist Manifesto? It's the UN in a nutshell.
George Bush Sr. went to Rio de Janeiro to an Earth Summit, a United Nations conference.
Its 10 points sound awfully familiar to life in our world, but it ain't supposed to be our world. This is America.
And infused every federal department with the protocol of Agenda 21.
We should have kicked them rascals out from day one.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
He said there is a new world order.
A new world order. A new world order.
Folks, are you going to allow this to happen in your country?
An order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Congress itself has been told in hearing after hearing that our military now gets its marching orders from NATO and the UN, and that the president need not go to Congress to authorize military operations.
Our goal would be to seek international permission, and we would come to the Congress and inform you.
I'm almost breathless about that, because what I heard you say is we're going to seek international approval, and they will come and tell the Congress what we might do.
Thomas Jefferson said it best. When people fear government, there is tyranny. When government fears the people, there is freedom.
Study their writings, see what they have to say, and understand the cost and what we're up against. The New World Order, over and over and over again, has stated on record, publicly, that they want to reduce world population between 80 and 90% forcibly.
The average American will react with nonchalance with a statement like that because it's too incredible to seem true. But in fact, it is the case.
Even Hollywood couldn't make up stuff like this.
The people of the world are waiting for Americans to wake up.
They want the world for themselves. They've stolen the planet through fraud.
Because if we don't wake up, they don't have a chance.
Now they want to get rid of us so we can't ever take it back.
You know what just kills me is how the first thing out of their mouth is always conspiracy theory. Sure, 1 and 1 is still 2.
Scripture says, and I look and behold a pale horse, and the rider upon him was death, and Hades followed close behind. and power was given him to kill a quarter of the population of the earth with the sword and with famine and with pestilence and with death. And basically, of course, this whole section of the Bible talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I believe we're seeing that at the present time.
The underlying premise of this Agenda 21 program, often called sustainable development, is the idea that private property is to be abolished.
Phone's ringing. Anybody home?
Property rights, which was the sacred cornerstone of our freedoms, is now out the window.
The Wildlands Project is designed to take over 50% of the United States and put it off limits to human beings, in violation, clearly, in my mind,
Is this right?
of the U.S. Constitution.
In the land of the free and the home of the brave.
When the Senate saw what this treaty was really, truly designed to do, it was taken off of the agenda 1 hour before the ratification vote was scheduled to be taken.
The reality about the pursuit of Agenda 21 is fail once, come back later.
Tens of thousands of acres are now plussed in wetlands, and various conservancies are in fact controlled by the United Nations.
The fattest target that we have, called ICLEI.
Even Yellowstone. Think about that, the jewel of American parks.
The International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives.
The whole idea of Agenda 21
ICLEI moves into your county and city administrative offices.
is to create a world feudal society.
And ICLEI then begins to design the ordinances that bring your community into the global confines, all subject to the new order. Imagine, as America continues its fall into a world system where all countries are of equal value. In fact, countries and boundaries are to be extinguished.
They want to get people out of their homes and into so-called sustainable communities.
To put us into packed areas
where they can be watched and monitored all of the time.
It is a treasonous act for your mayor and for your city council to sign contracts inflicting your community with the ICLEI program.
All over the world, under this standardized New World Order system, they leave the governors in place, they leave the mayors and the old system that was accountable to the people in place. They just make it ceremonial. And they create council of governors, rural councils. And with the council of governors, you have 10 governors by executive order, 10 governors over the 10 FEMA regions. And Homeland Security says the governors of the regular states don't matter anymore. Only these appointed 10 governors under Homeland Security and the 10 FEMA regions. And worldwide, the UN breaks the world into 10 global governors as well. Strangely enough, all that's right out of Revelation.
666. Mark of the beast, end time prophecy, or just today's reality? Only God knows the time and place, but it don't look good. That is, unless you're a Christian.
IBM, for example, has patented something called a person tracking unit.
If you read the book, you know how it ends. We win.
It's an RFID reader, a small little device that IBM recommends installing into things like doors, walls, floors, ceiling tiles.
Biometrics for identification literally places our religious freedoms, our right to privacy, our sovereignty, and our ability to buy and sell into the hands of international organizations.
Airports, train stops, bus stops, train stations, into museums, theaters, libraries, sports arenas, shopping malls, even elevators and public restrooms.
Can't buy or sell without a chip, world currency, world government. Where does it end?
The chilling part was it said every human being.
For the first time in history, the technology and the political will exist to fulfill prophecy.
Authoritarian officials with jackboots could say, your papers, please, and stop you and demand to see your ID.
The single global biometric system of identification and financial control.
You got the Titanic kind of coming along, needing to realize that there's a lot more to it. We, I believe, the American people, and indeed the people of the world, are in that same position. We've got a couple of little tiny glimmers that there's something wrong, that there are databases being collected, but what my research for the last 10 years has been about is trying to identify the bulk of that iceberg floating under the water so we don't hit it.
Justification will exist to move the identification process from the ID documents to directly on the body.
Your contactless or swipeless credit card is the same RFID technology that can be implanted into your right hand. Once people get used to this idea of just pressing the card up to the reader, it is just one step away from pressing your hand up to the reader.
Americans want Obamacare, free speech zones. How about open borders or Uncle Sam listening in on your telephone calls to Grandma or checking your email? National ID with a chip.
You'll need it in order to get on an airplane. You'll need it in order to open a bank account. In many communities, you'll need it in order to buy a home or rent an apartment.
Seems to me like we're heading for a hanging.
Revelation 13, 16 through 18 is very straightforward.
To receive a mark on their right hand or in their foreheads. And that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
Biometrics is a number of man.
Is 666. This time that is described in the Bible that was foreseen 2,000 years ago made no sense for centuries and centuries. Now we are actually living in a time where we can envision how it would be possible to have a mark or a number in everyone's right hand or their forehead. And we are actually in a world where it is politically not only possible, but it's occurring before our very eyes, that you will have to have such a number issued by a government, potentially eventually a one-world government, in order to engage in any kind of commerce, to buy, to sell, to live your life.
I'm often asked, well, what is the New World Order? You know, what's the game plan? What's going on here?
Who are they?
Let me put it this way. There is a small handful of very wealthy people, mostly men, that belong to what I call the secret societies.
Generational cartels of families, mainly based in Europe, but also in North America.
They have multiple shoes to wear. They have multiple places to go, multiple organizations.
They hate national sovereignty.
We're dealing, in fact, with a conspiracy here of power.
National sovereignty is a firewall against their global governance takeover.
And it's very secret. So they're not about to advertise who they are.
The Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas from Transylvania and Germany. You know them as the British royalty.
I think it was all put down a book that was written in 1948 by a British Fabian socialist by the name of Eric Arthur Blair. Of course, he didn't use his name. He used the pen name George Orwell.
Their cousins, the Dutch royalty, Queen Beatrix and her father who founded Bilderberg, Prince Bernhard, who was also a Nazi.
Yes, that was the book 1984. So let's take a look at what that said. In 1984, the world has been divided into three major economic blocks. In the book, it was Oceania, Asiana, and East Asiana. Today's real world, we've got the European Union, the soon-to-be North American Union, which combines the economies of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and then the future Asian Union.
2005, Texas. President George W. Bush, together with Mexico and Canada, signed the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America.
The mainstream media in the past would call this conspiracy theories.
First Europe, the European Union. Then NAFTA trade agreement into the North American Union, followed by the Trans-Pacific Agreement, where step by step the world is put into regional government heading toward one world government.
They write books, they put out scholarly publications, they give speeches to themselves about what they're doing.
They committed the three countries of North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, to start working together to knit what was envisioned to become a North American Union.
The idea of a North American Union, the combining of Canada and the United States and Mexico, has long been discussed among these secret society members.
You and I become citizens of North America, not citizens of the United States.
Is indicative, I think, of their confidence now that it doesn't matter if this is open. We have so much power here that they can't take us down.
The biggest stumbling block to this plan is the United States of America. Why is that? Because we have a tradition of individual freedom and liberty. And we have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights that guarantees us the legal basis for this individual freedom and liberty.
The globalists are the ones destroying our republic.
And we have guns.
You see them in controlling positions of government beyond their power legally to control.
This shows us something, too. It doesn't matter whether you've got a Republican or a Democrat in office, they follow the same agenda. I was onto this in the election of 2008, for example, because John McCain, who was his chief advisor, Henry Kissinger, secret society member, And President Obama, who was his chief advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Trilateral Commission, partners in crime, same folks. Doesn't matter who you vote for. They just keep us divided and conquered. Liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, white, black.
Jose Maria Aznar, an outsider, was elected president of Spain. What happened in your first day in office? They said, well, my first visitor was Henry Kissinger. He was explaining to me how the world works. Well, I'll bet he was.
Henry Kissinger, a member of Bilderberg Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations, wants the sovereignty of America gone.
Telling him, in essence, as a neophyte, where the power structures are, what your limits are, and where you take orders and who you take orders from.
Its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created.
You see it unfolding every day, hearing but not understanding, seeing but not perceiving.
The National Security Advisor to President Barack Obama stated, at the National Security Council, we take our daily marching orders from Henry Kissinger.
Seems incomprehensible.
It's an actual admission that Henry Kissinger, a non-elected official who has no power to dictate to anyone, is giving daily orders to the National Security Advisor of the United States of America.
Forget the hand puppets that they place in the positions of presidents, vice presidents, and ministers and prime ministers. That's all window dressing.
I don't know who's at the very top levels. It may well be David Rockefeller or Rothschild.
These are the people we need to start concentrating on.
People who give daily marching orders to presidents who are normally puppets. That doesn't mean they treat them as puppets, they treat them as president, but if they get out of line, they do lean on them, which is very instructive about this dark side of world control.
Ever hear political slogans that just don't ring the bell? Try left-right paradigm. At face value, it don't sound that rough. Well, think again. What it really means is there ain't no difference between Democrats and Republicans.
You create conflict, and you control both sides of the solution.
Big money globalists manipulate both sides of the fence. They're two political parties. Makes it easy to keep we the people dancing to whatever tune they play.
You don't ever present a correct solution, but you have a false solution on the right and a false solution on the left.
It's a rigged game, friend. Makes us the puppets and them pull the strings.
They manipulate crisis to accomplish the ends of getting people to get past conscience. And that's why it's a continual stream of crises.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
Because that's how you get good people to go along with bad solutions.
And why is it people don't understand what's happening to us today? Well, folks, it's very simple. There are 5 multinational corporations that have interlocking directorships. Okay, so a handful of people control these 5 corporations, and they determine everything you see and hear.
There's a statement from David Rockefeller from one of the Bilderberg meetings, which was ferreted out, that he was thanking the editors of the Washington Post and the New York Times who had been present with me for keeping the secret of not telling what goes on in this meeting.
I'm not just talking about news. I'm talking about magazines, newspapers, cable, movies, music.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and restricted their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world, even the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government.
David Rockefeller, who is actually was a founding member of the Bilderberg Organization.
A lot of people may say, what's wrong with people getting together and discussing world events at a Bilderberg meeting?
David Rockefeller, who organized the Trilateral Commission and is currently the honorary chairman of the North American chapter.
The problem is they are discussing things that are illegal.
David Rockefeller, who is the honorary chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Manipulation of war and manipulation of economy.
Sort of like trying to figure infinity.
That's why these things are top secret.
Their goal is to change the structure of our society.
As a young man, I walked in the way of Allah, holy jihad.
Many people would say, how could a religion pose such a threat?
Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, said this. He said, Inni umirtu an uqatil al-shu'ub. I have been commanded by Allah to war against the people of the world.
And what I would say to you is Islam is not a religion.
Ultimately, is a holy war.
Islam is totalitarian. It starts with a legal system called Sharia law.
Sharia law is the constitution of Islam.
Sharia law is the law that beheads people who leave the faith, that stones a woman to death for adultery, that cuts off the hand of the thief and the second time the foot, that allows for honor killings and genital mutilation of women. It's the law that allows a man to beat his wife. That's what they want for America.
I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, to Muslim Sunni family.
Their stated objective is to destroy our Constitution.
At the neighborhood mosque, I was recruited
and replace that Constitution with Sharia law
by the Muslim Brotherhood at 7 years of age.
Now, what that means to us as Americans is that if those people associated with the Muslim Brotherhood,
and my journey went for 20 years in jihad,
people that are adherents to authoritative Islam, are here in America to destroy our Constitution.
Al-Taqiyya. Al-Taqiyya is a lying doctrine where you lie to your enemy and deceive them until you make them your slaves.
And we're facing a threat that goes right at the very heart and foundation of who we are.
Then you have the rights to their families, to their home, to their women. My way of jihad came as a stealth jihad to infiltrate the civilization and shift its culture and its core from where it is to where we want it to be. We saw what happened in the House of Representatives when Boehner and all these men bowed their head and the Imam prayed and he declared Surah Al-Fatiha, the book of the opening. And what he said, غَيْرَ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. He declared that Allah is the entity and the people are not accepted are the Jews and the Christians. So he made his declaration. Even the House of Representatives must be now obtained by the Muslims.
We have to wake up and realize that we are in a serious battle here.
In a national cathedral, the Imam came into the cathedral and he faced Mecca and he declared Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah. He declared there's no God but Allah. Stealth jihad, where the Trojan horses has moved into our nation and now they are shifting our culture from within. He consecrated the place and now the place is made to be taken by the Muslim. It is an inheritance. Radical Islam came to replace peaceful Islam, and the last surah in the book is Al-Sayf, which is the sword. They are in our street, in our city. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, who they call him the Prince of Islam today, he said, I will see you in New York. He's coming to you in New York. From Islamism to socialism to Marxism to liberalism to secularism, all these are fascism, and fascism right now is moving into the United States of America, and the church is on the run. Even in Islam, it talks about one Islamic world order. It's called Ummah. We could not forget what the Black Robe Regiment did in the United States of America. These were pastors, and they led the war against slavery. Today, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I changed my way.
I have 4 little grandsons, and I don't want them to grow up in America that I envision. I want it to be more like the America that I grew up in.
The open borders are creating colossal issues because the Islamists are coming through the borders.
What we're seeing in America today is something very much like, from an intelligence perspective, asymmetrical warfare being waged against the American landscape. In order to attack America from within, they have to get their people, their street soldiers, into the United States. Everything that we see from an intelligence point of view says the United States government is at war with the people of the United States. This president spoke of having a civilian force larger and more powerful than the United States military. What he's talking about is a police state. Look at what they attack. They are attacking the conservatives. They're attacking the people that want to go back to the Constitution. This is a direct asymmetrical warfare tactic taken against the people of the United States. We have to wake you up somehow, folks.
John Wayne's gone. but the American spirit isn't. Y'all get off your bellies. Show them who we are.
I'm doing my little part of bringing the problem to the American public.
If you don't act now, it's going to be too late.
The invasion of America has taken place.
I joined the Minutemen and went on border watches from Texas to Arizona. It sort of mystifies me that more people are not involved in saving our republic. Folks, not just Mexico, but from the Middle East, everywhere in the world, they are coming across our borders.
We have to protect America and the American way of life first. Because the government is not doing that, they're not taking care of the interest of America and the American people.
I've got 17 deputies, 5 of them of which part-time, to cover 98 miles of border, right at 5,000 square miles of county.
The American family is not going to take this laying down.
200 yards inside American territory is a Mexican Humvee with a mounted 50 cal on top, fully loaded with soldiers. As this is taking place, of course, our officers freeze right there because they know there's no way they can compare with that 50.
Once they have figured out that this government has decided to do away with the middle class and to do away with the rule of law, and they have to fight for food, they're going to fight.
That Mexican Humvee with the Mexican soldiers, they set up and they flanked both sides of it, the soldiers did, as the dope runners went in there, tied chains to it and tried to pull it out. When they couldn't get it pulled out, then they did a human chain and they threw all the dope back on the Mexico side, and then they set the vehicle on fire and everybody went back on their merry way.
Well, this is the border fence.
I don't have to deputize everybody. They'll come, they'll grab the little old lady will grab her shotgun.
The fence ends right here. Beheadings, beatings, torturing, burning people in barrels.
We're fighting a losing battle.
That is a new phenomenon that is occurring along the border.
The federal Border Patrol agents were ordered by their superiors to pull away. There's no doubt in my mind the federal government has abandoned the border. They have retreated from the border. The U.S.-Mexico border is no longer the Rio Grande River. It's Interstate 10. If you live south of I-10, that is definitely almost America.
Gauntlet's been thrown down. Challenges, do your homework. You don't have to believe me. It's there, it's real. Look it up for yourself.
Here's my take on it. In Hudspeth County, when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to protecting the citizens of this county, the buck stops with me. I am the chief law enforcement officer of this county. And I don't care if the feds like it. I don't care if Obama himself likes it.
With all the problems we had in this country, we're the envy of the world. What happened to America?
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
A 5-star general. As he's leaving office, he warns the nation that the military-industrial complex is robbing us blind. How can we have gone from we're #1 in every category to now where we don't even win, place, or show? When did it happen? How did it happen? And why did it happen? It was the Federal Reserve. As most people know, was created on that Christmas Eve in Washington when nobody was there.
The Federal Reserve System is not a government agency.
They took the money and gave it all to the rich bankers.
Jekyll Island, Georgia, 1910. Even today, most Americans are not familiar with the gigantic fraud that was perpetuated against them and their country on this island.
The Federal Reserve Act.
International bankers formed a banking cartel. It was basically a scam, a Ponzi scheme. And it's important that the American people understand this story, that the world understands this story.
It's a program of financial enslavement. And now they've brought us to the point, through globalism,
your reaction to it,
of a worldwide engineered economic collapse
will determine the survival of the free world. I'm an author. I've written some books on topics like the Federal Reserve System, the United Nations. It's like a whodunit. It's a mystery story. It's the mystery story of a crime not only of the century, but the millennium.
Christ descended into hell. He took away all the powers of Satan. That's how the story goes, except for one, beguiling.
They're threatening to bring down the world economy if people don't accept a global government, in their words, run by them.
It means to fool someone, to trick someone.
You know the line. They're no more federal than Federal Express.
Obviously, if that fact had been made public, the whole scam would have been out and the plan would have failed.
It's a private company.
The Federal Reserve Act was sold to the American people as being a so-called reform bill.
The Federal Reserve called that Federal Reserve note its product.
If they actually said they were bills to cheat the American people, they wouldn't get by very far.
But there's a caveat. It says you can use our product, but for using it, you're going to have to pay a tax on it.
All they did was game the system.
People like Rockefeller and Carnegie and others, they rose to the top because of free enterprise competition. They're coming together and they're sitting around a table in Jekyll Island and they're saying, okay, guys, this is the end of competition. Let's form a cartel. Let's sell it to the stupid Americans as though it's a reform bill to control bankers. They'll buy it because they won't know any different. And then we will set our own regulations. We will control our own industry.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution clearly states that Congress has a sole authority to print and regulate the supply of money.
We have been defrauded.
They turned it over to the white shoe boys, the crooks and criminals on Wall Street.
Fiat money is the kind of money that the world is suffering under today everywhere. The word fiat, I believe, is the French word for command or edict or decree.
We have to consider our power.
The trouble with fiat money is that since it doesn't have anything of intrinsic value behind it, it's very easy to make.
Once we start on this road to regaining our power, we'll take back our states. We can't take back the federal government.
The Federal Reserve System has been revised over 100 times.
We could institute our printing presses within our states immediately.
Each time it's revised, it gets stronger and stronger.
Printing securities for the American people.
Until finally it is absolute economic king of the monetary system of America.
And anybody that knows their history knows that throughout the entire beginning of the United States of America, the major issue was from the founding right up through to 1913, the bankers taking over the country.
It is truly a creature that has grown to tremendous proportions.
Let's have our securities backed by an inexhaustible commodity known as human labor.
One of the congressmen asked Chairman Bernanke,
we're taking a dishonest money system or currency system and we're replacing it with an honest money system.
We've authorized all of this money, these trillions of dollars, to be given to various banks to bail them out. We'd like to know where this money went. Would you tell us where this money went? And Bernanke looked at him and blinked for a moment. He said, no.
And that's what happened in America.
Al Gore, he's one of my favorite guys. You know how I say that politics is show business for ugly people? And things really never changed since high school. Remember in high school and college, you had these guys and girls that wanted to be the class president or the head of the student council. You could see Al Gore. You could just see him. You know, with that blue blazer on, those khaki pants, a little wide behind, but the kind of guy in the locker room, you know, that wouldn't undress in front of the guys. Al Gore was in front of the nation in a debate with Ross Perot, selling NAFTA, gave the nation away. Take down those pesky trade barriers. We gotta go global, they says. They promised that the American standard of living would increase. Increase? Quality of life, way up, they said. What happened? They said that we don't need that dirty manufacturing. We're gonna turn this nation into a nation of service sector workers. That's right, service sector. Break it out. Servitude. Serf. Servant. We went from a nation of merchants, craftsmen, entrepreneurs, manufacturers, skilled workers, to clerks, cashiers. Hey, how about stocking some shelves at Walmart at 2 o'clock in the morning? There's a job for you. Oh, you don't like that one? How about a home health aide? They've done it. They sold the country out. Fair trade, free trade. What are they kidding? What am I, 6 years old? These people have an attitude that they're all better than everybody else. The puppet strings, the puppets, the Gores, the Bushes, the Clintons. Don't say anything bad about them. You know, what do you think, their mother's better than mine? Let's just put it on the record. We'll call it even, okay? But I can say this with full authority. Mrs. Bush could never cook like my mother. I'm Italian, I know what good food is. Here's my forecast. There's going to be a devaluation of the United States currency. They'll have an excuse for it. They'll blame terrorism. Maybe we'll be at war. But they'll call a bank holiday. What holiday? You can't get your money out. We're going to see a worldwide collapse. The stimulus game is over. We're going to see crime rates to levels we've never seen before. Current events form future trends. You see what's going on in Greece with the riots? What happens is going to go on in Spain, it's going to go on in England, it's going to go on in Ireland, it's going to go on in Italy, it's going to go on in Portugal, it's going to go on in the United States, it's going on worldwide. When the systems collapse, you're going to start seeing civil wars and world war.
I think it's going to begin with a preemptive strike on Iran that will lead, I think, to World War III. There has to be a reason why North Korea is being preserved and treated with kid gloves. And yet Iran, far more civilized, far more open to the West, far more open to the people, tyrannical in its own way. I'm not justifying Iran, but what I'm saying is we give them no quarter whatsoever, and we say the military option is always on the table. It's very clear we're going after Iran, but we're never going to touch North Korea. Why? The reason is because North Korea is a puppet of Russia and China, that our own government has been covering for Russian rearmament and downplaying the massive armament of Red China. There is never an annual report on Russia and their rearmament, their secret underground bunkers, cities the size of the Washington, D.C. metro area underground. North Korea, when they attacked South Korea with such overwhelming conventional military might, that's a trigger for U.S. intervention. Even if it's tactical nuclear, all of a sudden Russia and China have the excuse to launch their long-planned preemptive nuclear strike on America. It takes 20 to 30 minutes for those missiles to arrive at their targets. There have been numerous whistleblowers coming out of the Soviet Union and China telling them of Chinese intent to strike the West. Our own government wants us to sustain total military damage in that first strike. Every major city has a life cycle of food and water after a preemptive nuclear strike of approximately 1 to 2 days. And after that, I believe we'll see mass panic, and then from that to the next 6 months, waves of pillaging. That's my warning to America, is that we're facing an actual third world war. It will be used as an excuse to drive us into a new world order.
It's simple. You don't have to be a trend forecaster to figure this one out. All you have to do is open up your eyes.
There's evil afoot, and the devil's in the details. Our America, once inspired that great experiment in human dignity, is now far from such a bold beginning, far from God, far from we the people. Folks, we're hanging over an abyss feet first, and there's something wrong. There's something bad wrong.
Why do we have any government at all? Why not anarchy? Most people don't want anarchy. So why did the Founding Fathers choose a constitutional republic?
We hear the term American exceptionalism, but so often many people don't know what it means.
Why not socialism? Why not communism?
America is not exceptional because we are taller than other cultures or a different color or a different history, but America is exceptional because of the foundation on what our country was established upon. The United States of America was built upon this thing called the law of nature and nature's God. The law of nature and nature's God simply means God's law, whether that be something observable, such as the law of gravity, which we can see every day, or God's moral law, which, according to Blackstone, was clearly given to us in the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament.
During the War of 1812, James Madison, the architect of the Constitution, fled from Washington to the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, to the Belle Grove Plantation, his wife's family home. Today, America faces a constitutional crisis more profound and dangerous than Madison could ever have imagined.
The Constitution is the most significant document that we have because it protects life, liberty, and property.
The most important words, in fact, in the Constitution are the first three: we the people.
Thomas Jefferson once said that in matters of conscience, let no more be heard of confidence in men.
The design of our country was that God has given rights to man.
But bind them down with the chains of the Constitution.
We, the people of the United States, delegated 17 enumerated powers to this newly established federal government, period.
For many decades now, the federal government has continued to get outside the bounds.
All other power remain the rights of the several states and we the people.
They are now threatening the rights that we hold sacred and dear.
And the last line of defense are the states.
Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the right to keep and bear arms.
They shall not infringe upon a person's right to keep and bear arms.
We need to educate people about the 10th Amendment and how the states have a rightful role to say no to corruption from the federal government.
It is the state's responsibility to check that overreach
and to bring balance through separation of powers.
Jefferson and Madison in particular said, you know, it's not just an option that the states have. It's not just a prerogative that the states have to maintain their sovereignty.
We think a lot of our states' rights down here in the South.
It's a duty.
But state sovereignty is not just a Southern thing. It's the heart of America's founding principles.
I authored the 10th Amendment resolution just a few years ago, and the reason I did that is because of this encroachment on our rights by the federal government. They are lawbreakers.
You've seen some patches around the country where state legislatures have passed a state law that says we're a sovereign state, and we believe that that act passed by the Congress is unconstitutional, and therefore it will be null and void in our state.
Over 30 states have now filed or passed that bill.
Any federal officer who attempts to enforce that law within our boundaries will be guilty of a state crime.
While I was serving as sheriff of Graham County, Arizona, I actually did something pretty crazy. I sued my own government. Bottom line, will we follow the Constitution in the United States of America? 3 agents of the federal government come to a Sheriff's Association meeting in Phoenix and hand us a 25-page document telling us these were our marching orders.
Any law that is an unconstitutional law is not a law at all.
A mandate that was forcing me and the other sheriffs to violate our oaths of office to comply with a federal statute to promote more gun control. They're not our boss. The United States Supreme Court ruled in our favor. Sheriff Prince from Montana and yours truly, Sheriff Mack from Arizona. We beat the federal government.
We have a responsibility.
The 10th Amendment was restored.
Having been given these rights by God to defend them.
If your sheriffs, if your county commissioners, and your county attorneys stand and keep their oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, we reconnect with freedom tomorrow.
When our forefathers, just a few years after having fought for liberty from tyranny, decided that they needed to establish a federal government, they were scared to death of reestablishing another tyranny.
Most of what our government does is unconstitutional.
Where there is absolute power, there is absolute corruption.
People across the United States are beginning to realize that the government we currently have is not the government that the Founding Fathers imagined.
We're taught that the solution is we need to get all fired up and get ready for the next election in 2 years.
It's not the government described by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
We need to redouble our efforts. We need to send more money to the Republican Party or send more money to the Democratic Party, and that'll solve things. Folks, we've been sold a bill of goods. Not only is Washington not capable of fixing itself, but Washington doesn't want to fix itself.
We're witnessing a struggle to the death.
There are 12,000 lobbyists that work in Washington, D.C.
Between something called collectivism and something called individualism.
And everybody's trying to stick their hand in and take out their share.
This is the chasm. This is the contest.
They have no financial motivation to fix the problem.
All these words like communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, neocon, all these words, they're merely variants of one thing which is collectivism.
They admit global government is here, and it's run by this tiny group of mega-rich who actually promote communism and socialism for the general masses so that they can get people under their control and have the downtrodden, dumbed-down, unwashed masses, as they call them, used as a weapon against the middle class.
What is the difference between communism and fascism or Nazism, for example? Fundamentally, there's no difference. So they had different leaders. They have different flag, different uniforms, different countries. But what do they believe in? They believe in the same. One of the things that is common to collectivism, all variants of collectivism, is the belief that the group is more important than the individual.
Ultra-rich are always seeking to collectivize and dumb down and disenfranchise the largest mass they can.
The individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number.
To then forge them into a weapon to bring in collectivism.
Well, a lynch mob is majority rule. There's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. A republic was a state based on principles which protected the individual against the group. In other words, it was based on the concept of individualism, that the individual was the core of society, not the group. Collectivism is that the group is the core of society and the individual must be sacrificed to support the group. Oh, this is a profound difference. The leader can say, I speak for the group. I speak for the majority. I speak for democracy. You follow me. And if you don't, we exterminate you. Why? Because it's in the best interest of the group. The group is always used as the excuse for any atrocity in modern systems.
Once you learn the truth, you can never unlearn it.
It's best for society. We have to sacrifice a few people there, a few hundred people there, a few thousand people there. It's all right. Too bad about them, but the greater good of society is all that's important. You find that concept in communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism. Unfortunately, you find it in the American system today.
Jefferson in particular, he saw the nation even then, the men in power being corrupted by that power. And he said, you don't have to look too far into the future. In a time not too distant, he says, we're going to see this corrupted nation, not unlike the one that we've left.
The states who created the federal government are the only ones that have the ability to rein back in and out of control federal government. We can, and we must.
We don't read the Constitution. We don't understand the ideas in the Constitution.
We elect people who raise their right hand and they take an oath to the Constitution. They swear to uphold it and then they ignore it.
We're seeing a global mafia-like stranglehold coordinated by the most powerful men in the world, meant to erase American sovereignty and consolidate nations into world government.
The Constitution is not compatible with a globalist agenda.
It's ambitious and it's morally corrupt.
The states who created the federal government to begin with must be the ones that say enough.
Seems to me we need a dog in this fight. We need a lot of dogs in this fight.
Is this American empire actually America?
And you and me, we're it.
Or is it the twisted, unconstitutional, unholy perversion of America?
This nation's revolution was won with just about 30% of the people.
When others govern you, you will not like the result.
We have allowed men to do what men do, and that is to become dictatorial as they accrue more and more power.
It has to happen at the local level.
Not just saying no to Washington, but it's really at the state level, looking at what our policies ought to be and what limited government is.
So it really comes back once again to those three words in the Constitution.
It is freedom.
We the people.
Government has grown so much, all of us are gonna go through a weaning process. And if you grew up on a farm, you know that gets pretty painful. Those calves bawl and squall and holler, don't they? When you pull them off of their mamas, they make a lot of racket.
And in them, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, hearing, you will hear and not understand. Seeing, you will see and not perceive.
Have you no eyes to see or ears to hear?
The hearts of this people have grown dull. Matthew 13:15. Folks, there's a terrible storm approaching, and it's a spiritual battle designed by dark, evil men to sweep the world imprison humanity in high-tech feudalism controlled by an arrogant so-called elite. Time to ride, boys. We need 1,000 Paul Reveres.
The only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for good men and women to do nothing.
You must speak out, and you must speak out soon.
1776 closes with defeat on every front. Try as we may, the British have foiled our every effort. I have pledged my sword, my honor and fortune to our glorious cause. Gentlemen, we shall stand firm. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Thomas Paine.
I would like you to consider it your Constitution. It is your Bill of Rights. This is your responsibility to keep the government within those constitutional limitations.
If Jefferson and Madison were here today,
Please, don't let liberty slip through your fingers.
and they were aware of the economic and social and cultural and constitutional problems that we're facing in America, what would they do?
I believe yet in the spirit of 1776.
Well, what did they do when they were alive?
All my life, I've heard people say, oh, let Washington take care of it. Well, folks, they have, and it's not a pretty picture.
Remember us.
Our sacrifice.
We died on the fields of France. Lest you forget. Never forget.
We can't forget.
A new world order? Unthinkable in my time.
We become snooky stupid at every level.
You are the solution. When you wake up and get involved and speak out against tyranny,
Remember us.
nothing can stop you.
Educate yourself.
Use the First Amendment.
Then start educating the people around you.
It is more powerful than the second. If you use it, we will bring these criminals to justice.
So what's the solution? Where do we go? What do we do next?
20% of the people that regain their respect get in shape physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
This is not a time for spectators.
Start doing what they believe they should be doing morally. This country changes.
You know, the Bible has a formula, a recipe, a prescription, right from the hand of God.
The whole world is looking at United States of America.
I don't have a better answer than that. I don't think anybody else does.
Pray that the country will regain its strength and its path.
We've got to harness the power that holds the universe together, and we can do that only by humbling ourselves in prayer and repentance to the God who created the universe. If we do, God has given us a promise. He will heal our land.
This country is the last beacon of hope. Do not disappoint him.
If you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animated contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel, nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. And may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. Samuel Adams.
It's probably 11:30 at night, and the clock is ticking, but a lot can be done in half an hour, historically speaking.
There was no rules, no limits for us.
When we come together and we deliberate, then we will find the wisest course.
And that's why this has to be a revolution of the mind and the spirit.
Now is the time for light, for reason, to shine upon the stage of political darkness.
When we do that, we're going to soar and we're going to fly in ways that American eagle is going to cruise again. It's going to be good. It's going to be a good time in America.
Get her done, America.
We're the solution. We the people, Americans. Ain't nothing more to it than that.
Get off the couch and do something.
I myself am personally not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of what they can do to me, because I know that the only one I really need to please is ultimately my Maker.
The grand American dream arrives at a final crossroads.
When I go back on the other side, I want to hear those words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant."
So many people talk about taking up arms when the UN blue helmets show up.
It rolls over people's shoulders and eyes go back. What's for lunch? What's for lunch? You are.
If you won't pick up the pen today, you will not pick up the sword tomorrow.
We were born for such a time as this.
There are traitors among us. Let's get a rope. Time for a hanging. But seriously, folks, this republic, its traditions and heritage, Christianity and freedom are all being dismantled before our very eyes.
Santa Anna demands surrender. I answer with cannon shot. Victory or death.
I will die for my country.
I, sir, will die for Texas. We stood against tyranny to the last. Now it remains as necessary for your time as for ours. For all Americans to draw such a line in the sand. No is a powerful concept.
It's time to ride, boys. We need 1,000 Palmer beers.
And now, the choice is yours.
O ye that love mankind, ye that dare oppose not only tyranny, but the tyrant, stand forth. Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1775.
It's been a long time coming because of what we did on this day, at this defining moment. Change has come to America.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation.
My friends,
it was a rare and precious
you are the solution.
Conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the
It's
world.
time for us to put on the whole armor of God.
But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor. While the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string. It makes his little puppets dance to every song he sings as the night rolls in on a rising tide. Look beyond the shadows, behold a pale horse ride. They claim to seek a new world order, nations without borders, but don't believe the lie. Even in this wealthy nation, it could come down to starvation in the twinkling of an eye. They tell us there will soon be peace, our lives will be an endless feast, but they lead us toward the dark. In the distance, sabers rattle, and the armies train for battle as the beast prepares his mark. There's an unseen hand that pulls a string and makes his little puppets dance to any song he sings as the night rolls in on the rising tide. Look beyond the shadows, behold a pale horse ride. It's time for every righteous man to take a stand, there is so little time. For if we fear and hesitate, soon it will be too late. We're the last hope of mankind. Time hurries on, the shadows fall, the hand is writing on the wall, but even now, there's still a chance. For if the ones called by God's name repent of sin and seek his face, he will hear and heal the land. There's an unseen hand reaching from above, and a gentle voice that beckons to the shelter of his love. Come on home, my wayward child, 'cause out on the horizon there's a pale horse running wild. America, my wayward child, can't you hear the thundered hoofbeats of a pale horse running wild?
No is a powerful concept.
It's time to ride, boys. We need 1,000 Paul Reveres.